Alright, so my scene is lit up. I have all my windows set. I have my layers on and they're all on one layer. So as you can see, I turn them off and on. They're all on one layer and that's what I want. I want to make sure everything has its own layer and it's named. So now what I want to do is I want to create some kind of a blur effect. So it's not like a glow for all those windows, but I'm going to go in and do that with my Gaussian blur effect. So what I'll do is go into filter, I'll go down to blur and hit Gaussian blur. So what's nice is that this gives me a preview, and when I uncheck I don't see a preview, but I want to make sure I have the preview checked so I see just how much of a blur I want. So I can go down the scale and say I want less or I want more. So the more you go, you notice that you have a little bit more transparency that happens because pixels are becoming a lot more softer on the edges. So I want to make sure I have something that looks like this. Okay, I might want to change the colors a little bit, so I'll double click, go into color overlay, and I'll select that and maybe just lighten things up a tad bit, maybe go into my yellows over here, tiny bit. I still want to make sure I'm in the same hue as the moon, just for consistency. I've just added a tiny bit more yellow. That might be a good amount, like so. Or darken, but I think I want something that is not too bright but still like a little bit more on the neutral side. So that should work, or you can go darker. I think darker might work actually. Yeah, I think darker might work because I don't want it to be too cartoony. So that works. Now I want to start bringing in more assets to my scene. So I will bring up my folder. I want to make sure that I have, let's see, I want to bring in some more assets over here, so I'll go File, Place, and start playing around with the other types of elements in my scene. So let's start with the black trees. Those will definitely have an effect on my Halloween scene. And I want to make sure this is behind the haunted house, like so. I'm going to decrease the size a little bit, like so. Okay. Now I want to change the color too, so I want to make sure this icon is not there, so I will rasterize the layer and go into blending options and hit color overlay. And now in here I get to choose how I want the color of the trees to be. So that's also one way of doing it. So I'm just going to stick to this dark blue background that I have and apply that to my trees, like so. So I want to make sure I have something overlapping the moon. So the trees are in front of the moon, but they're behind the haunted house. And I might want to decrease the scale just a tiny bit. And I also want to make sure that the halo part of the moon shows some of those trees. And then I will hit down Option and drag to create another layer of forest foliage. So like so. And just bring this off to the side, like that. Okay. You can make this smaller or bigger, it's up to your discretion. Let's see what happens when we start layering things like this. I'm just creating different copies like that. Okay. Some kind of asymmetry going on. So now I have a few copies of the black trees. I want to make sure those are all selected, so I'll select and then hit Shift to select all those layers, and I will hold down Control to bring up the submenu, And what I want to do is I want to merge the layers so that it forms one layer like this. So I don't have multiple layers. I want to make sure I have as little layers as possible to organize everything and not make sure everything is a complete mess, because layers can get very messy. Make sure that we're naming these. So we'll say black trees. Okay, like that. Alright, so now let's bring in more assets. Let's go File, Place. I have the bats, I have the jack-o'-lantern. I would like to work with the black gate now. So here's my black gate. I want to make sure my gate is in the front. And I definitely need to decrease the size of that gate. And I also want to work with, yeah, I definitely need to change that. Rasterize the layer, get rid of that, so I just have one gate and I can manipulate this gate to my liking. I want to go Command T for transform. I'm decreasing the size like so. Okay, and I can change the color, of course, so I'm going to hold down Control, and then I want to make sure I'm in blending options, color overlay. You can change this to any color, but I'm going to stick to the background color that we have here, or we can do like this light blue color, but I'm just going to stick to that dark color that we have in the background for a more dramatic effect. So you can see that my scene is starting to come together nicely. Liking where it's going. It's got the crisp detail that I want. I'm not going for something too scary. I'm just looking for something that is festive and, oops, I'm copying this gate 3 times here on each side. We can definitely go scary and horror to your liking. I still want to make sure that I have like a kind of consistency going on where I see layers and details just by recreating this scene, and it's up to your discretion as to how you would like to recreate your scene. Could be a horror scene, could be a trick-or-treat scene, it could be a scene from the Joker or Batman, whatever. Up to your discretion. Or none of these. It could be something else completely made up from your own imagination, which is also fine. The more creative, the better. So now we have the black gate set up. I'm going to select these by holding down Control, and then I will merge the layers and double click to call this black gate, like so. Now we're going to bring in more assets. I will say place linked. Let's bring in Mr. Raven here. Scale him down, like so. And let's say I want him perched maybe somewhere here, like that. Or maybe, yeah, somewhere here where his head is poking in. And then let's change this color to match the background, like so. Okay. And now we have a few more assets to play around with. I believe we have the jack-o'-lantern. We will place the jack-o'-lantern. I believe that's the last asset we have. No, we have the bats still, but those will place last. So this is looking a little too cartoony for my liking, but it works. I'll show you how we can play around with it. All I'm going to do is do the entrance with a few jack-o'-lanterns, going from smallest to largest, and the reason why I was going from the farthest to the nearest to the angle of the viewer. So I have my jack-o'-lantern here, my raven is here, and I'm going to rasterize the layer like so, decrease the size, and it's just going to be something in front of the entrance. So to zoom in to show you, I'm going to get rid of the black gate just temporarily, just so we can see how we're recreating this scene in the entrance. Make sure that the jack-o'-lantern layer is selected, and then And mind you, the color is not going to stay the same. I'm going to manipulate that, and I'll show you how. I'm just going to place a few on each step, and this definitely needs to be much smaller, like that. Okay, so I'm going from farthest to the nearest to the viewer. So I'm going to make sure this guy sits properly on the edge, like so, and then we are creating that same thing on the other side. You might want to go a little bigger for this guy here. Okay. And I'm going to do the same thing for the other side too. Just create a more symmetrically, or maybe not, maybe they're stacked, like different areas of the image. Okay. We'll see what works. I think in this particular case, as we can see, the smaller ones seem to make a little bit more sense than the larger ones, so I might need to adjust the scale just a tiny bit so that it makes sense spatially. Definitely don't. I'm not going for something cartoony. It's perfectly fine if you want to. That's just not what I gravitate towards. I do want to have some kind of a realistic scene, just based on the spatial quality of my assets. All right. Now see if this is a good balance, because this scene is fairly symmetrical. We might need to create a more symmetrical balance. And I think it warrants a more symmetrical look, so we'll adjust that accordingly. So we'll decrease the size a little bit to match, or you can copy and paste this guy, it's fine too. I kind of like how this guy is set up, so what I'm going to do is drag and then copy and paste. Okay. Oops. So I'm seeing that spatially things need to change a little bit. These might need to go a tad bit larger, just because they're closer to the viewer, like so. Okay. So now let's take all our jack-o'-lanterns and go down and hold Control, and we are going to merge the layers. So now we're going to, oops, jack-o'-lantern S. Okay. We're going to change the colors a little bit, so it's not this bright orange. This is a night scene, so we want to make sure that this still makes sense with the rest of the other assets. So we'll make sure that we're on this layer. We're going to go back in to this icon over here, and we're going to, I'm going to go into levels. And here, this is where you can work with your darks, your middle tones, and your lighter tones. So as you can see, this changes the whole scene. I don't want that. I want this clipped to the jack-o'-lanterns only. So go in here, and you'll notice that you can darken those up or lighten those down, like so. You definitely want them to be darkened. Okay. Then what I want to do, I want to go into brightness and contrast. And I also want to make sure this is clipped to the same layer. So. So a bit more of a night scene. Okay, so this works. Now let's bring in the gate, which I had on hide. And I want to make sure that the jack-o'-lanterns are behind the gate. So, oops, what happened here? Yeah, I need to select all those layers and then bring up the gate on top of the jack-o'-lantern. So now that makes sense. Okay, I think what we have now are a few things like the bats that we need to place. And the scene is almost ready to be done and called complete. So I'm going to place these guys over the moon like this and just manipulate the size. Again, go down and rasterize the layer. I want to go into my blending mode and change the color like so into this night scene. Okay, I just use the eyedropper tool. Double click, eyedropper tool, okay, and we have that color ready. And I'm going to go Command T and scale them down a little bit, like so. I'm going to go maybe off to the side. Okay. Adjusting. Alright. So now what I would like to do, before I call this complete, I would like to bring in some clouds, just a bit of a foggy haze. And I'll create a layer, and I want to make sure that layer is behind the trees. So I want to go down to where my trees are, or the black forest. So it can be behind the forest or it could be in front of it, but I want to make sure that this is the area that I want to be playing around with. So I'll just work with how they are right now and just play around with the fog behind the trees. So I'm going to select my brush. I've selected a brush that is soft and round and that has not much of a hardness because I want some fog effect to happen. And I want to make sure my brush is large. And I want to make sure I select a color that is similar to my image over here, my scene. So I'm color picking, and I'll do this by holding down the Option key and color picking the haunted house. And then I probably want to bring down the opacity to something like 18, so it's not something too dramatic. So as you can see, this is in front of the trees. I want this to be in the back of the trees, like so. Okay, so get a bit of swirl-like effect with the fog going on. And what's interesting about this is you can actually create effects like this that are more realistic by going into your filter, and I believe it's render, and you can say render different clouds. It'll give you like a more realistic effect, which is nice. Let's say I want to recreate the same thing maybe in front of the trees. So what I'll do is create another layer. Let's make sure we're naming our layers. So behind the trees, or in front, sorry, like so. So we have a more misty effect going on. Again, go into filter, difference, clouds. And you can create as many layers as you want to get the realistic effect that you desire. I want to go back to the background and just recreate. So my scene is looking where it needs to be. I'm pretty happy with the overall effect. I'm just kind of bringing in some fog in there. And I might want to take a look and see, okay, is there something I want to change? Is this kind of accurate in terms of color? Because remember, all those are found assets that we have found on the internet, and we just collage them together to recreate a new scene. Okay? So let's say I want to take a look at all my assets together. I'll select them all. So what I did was I selected the very top layer, and I went all the way down to the last layer, held down Shift, and that selects all my layers. Let's say I want to play around with the maybe the hue and saturation a little bit and see if there's something I can do. So here, this kind of saturates more, saturates less. I can go darker, a more moodier scene, or lighter. I'm liking the more moodier scene, like so. Or you can go crazy outer space looking effect for your haunted house, which is fine too. I'm gonna stick to where I was at. And then I'm going to go back and just take a look and see if there are any fine details I need to have changed. So here, I might want to lessen the contrast a little bit, like so. There. Maybe I want the contrast to be, yeah, that's kind of where I need it to be. Higher the contrast, but lower the brightness. That's pretty much what I'm looking for my blood moon to really appear. Okay, so now I'll just see if I can bring in some adjustments here and there. But this is pretty much the idea of this Halloween graphic. And then what I'll do is conclude this by saying, happy Halloween. Just using the type tool. Command T, make this much smaller, like so. You might want to bring down the moon a tad bit so you can see the type. Maybe the bats need to be a little smaller as well. Yeah. So it's more of a realistic scene. Okay. And this is it. This is pretty much the scene you'll be creating, something where you have at least 5 different objects that you found on the internet and repurpose them in a festive way for Halloween. You can send this to your friends, your family. It's a different type of Halloween this year due to COVID. Hope there's always ways for us to find creative ways to celebrate and to be festive with people that we know and we care about. So this is just a quick Halloween tutorial. Hope you like it, enjoy it, and I will see you in the next video where we talk about your assignment.